to have Gina and Yvonne here, who will be able to draw on their wealth of practitioner experience to share how they've seen residency programs work through some of these challenges. So Gina will share some models for affordable and sustainable residencies and strong partnerships. And then Yvonne will share how Alder residency partnerships have been working to connect teachers with financial supports. So I know many of you who are here are very familiar with California's teacher workforce context, but we wanted to start by briefly situating the residency grant in California's teacher workforce challenges to give a sense of some of the issues the grant is positioned to address. We know there's an ever-growing urgency to address a chronic teacher shortage in California. We know that the shortage disproportionately affects high poverty schools and students of color. We also have a significant gap in California between the race and ethnicity of teachers and the students they teach. And then particularly relevant for residencies, according to a recent analysis from CTERN, teachers of color in California are more likely to begin teaching through less supportive pathways, so mainly internships and emergency credentials, and without comprehensive preparation. And by way of example, 45% of Black new teachers began their career on a substandard credential, compared to 23% of white new teachers. So residencies have been emerging nationwide as part of the puzzle to increasing the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. There's been an increasing focus on, and this slide outlines some of the major levers that are being put forth as important to diversifying the teaching profession. And so you'll notice that these levers span across a teacher's preparation and tenure. There's no silver bullet, but we do know that research has shown that improving teacher retention begins with high quality teacher preparation. And teacher residencies are one of a constellation of research supported strategies you see here to increase access to high quality teacher preparation. So what are teacher residencies? I think a lot of you currently are involved with teacher residencies or know quite a bit about them, but for those who are newer to the model, teacher residencies are operated by a partnership between a local school district or county office of education and a university of college, so between an LEA and IHE. They're tailored to support the specific instructional and staffing needs of local schools and districts, and they're traditionally focused in hard to staff schools and subject areas. And then at the heart of teacher residencies is rigorous clinical preparation. So credentialing coursework is integrated with a year-long placement in the classroom of an expert mentor teacher. And then crucially, to enable this rigorous clinical preparation, residencies need to provide residents with financial supports. And this is often in exchange for a commitment to teach in the district for a specified number of years. So how do residencies support a diverse workforce? Residencies include an emphasis on recruiting teachers of color and teachers from local communities. Residents gain intensive district-specific classroom experience. The service commitment helps ensure that resident completers remain in high-need schools. And then the financial supports that residents receive during the residency year can broaden access to high-quality preparation. This is one of the most important parts of the residency model, and it's also one of the trickiest we've seen to get in place. So Gina and Yvonne will be sharing more about how to make this happen. And research has indicated that on average, residents are more racially diverse than new teachers entering through other pathways. Teacher residencies result in teachers who are better prepared and responsive to the hiring needs and contexts of their partner LEAs, and residents are retained at greater rates than peers from other pathways. So enter the California Teacher Residency Grant Program. California has authorized over $600 million through the state budget to support teacher residency programs in designated shortage areas. These include STEM, SPED, bilingual education, computer science, TK in kindergarten, and now guidance counselor preparation and workforce diversification. LEAs, in partnership with an IHE, can apply for implementation and expansion grants to launch or expand residencies, and these are funded at $40,000 per resident. And they can also apply for capacity grants to plan or build capacity either before their residency implementation or alongside, and these are up to $250,000 per LEA. And to date, we've had 37 LEA IHE partnerships funded through the 2018 legislation, and then around, so far, 98 LEA IHE partnerships funded through the 2021 expansion. And Gina will share at the end of our presentation more about how to apply and how to access supports. So there's been a lot of new partnerships joining the TRGP through the most recent round of funding. But we also have an initial cohort of residency partnerships that were funded through the 2018 legislation. And they've been doing the work of building residency programs, working through on-the-ground implementation challenges since 2019. And so as more grantees are joining the TRGP, this initial round of programs have a lot to teach the field. WestEd has been serving as the external formative evaluators for the grant in partnership with the CTC, and we've been working to capture some of these takeaways. So what we want to do today is share two key implementation challenges that residency programs have faced. The first is building affordable residencies that leverage sustainable funding sources. So funding sources that will extend beyond the one-time grant funding that the grant offers. And then the second is building strong residency partnerships that are characterized by LEA and IHE leadership engagement, coordination with HR and fiscal services, and sufficient staffing and communication structures. But I'll start with some promising indicators from the early years of the TRGP. We've seen that TRGP-funded residencies are attracting a more diverse teaching workforce that better reflects California's students. We've also seen that early placement and retention data are showing around 90% of the first two cohorts of TRGP-funded residents were hired in California. 88% of those are still teaching in their second year. And we've seen that residents and mentor teachers and partnership team members are praising the strength of clinical preparation that residents receive through their year-long placement with an expert mentor teacher. And these are two quotes that I think illustrate this really nicely. One resident said, "I loved being able to be in a district that I love with a community that I'm familiar with. I noticed that my peers that were not residents do not have the same experiences with planning, teaching, and connecting the students and staff members that I did. I was also given more responsibilities and was able to communicate with parents. I'm very glad I became a resident and that I didn't take the regular path as a student teacher. The residency program gave me hope to be hired on as a teacher in a school that I'm familiar with." And a mentor teacher said, "The residency program has been a tremendous source of learning both for my resident as well as for me. Having a resident challenged me to closely examine every aspect of my teaching. Additionally, it gives me the opportunity to give back to a field that I love. I'm honored to be part of a program that is creating well-trained and well-rounded special education teachers, something that's been missing in our field for years. I'm proud of our district for making special education teacher training a priority." So moving into those implementation challenges that I mentioned earlier. Challenge one, most residencies were not yet offering the level of financial support needed to make residencies an affordable option for candidates. We saw that financial barriers were the most significant recruitment challenge. Leads reported challenges competing with intern and permit and waiver entry options. A majority of residents also experienced financial hardship during their residency year. These financial hardships disproportionately impacted residents of color. But among this, there were several bright spots that Yvonne and Gina will be able to elaborate on. So several programs are providing residents with a livable wage and health insurance by leveraging full or part-time district-based employment as paraprofessionals. Other programs, and Yvonne will be able to speak to this, are braiding financial are braiding available funding sources in addition to the grant to support affordability and sustainability. Challenge 2, most programs had room to strengthen their partnerships. Residency program leads expressed a desire for increased LEA and IHE leadership, engagement, and awareness, and a stronger alignment between the residency program and the LEA's workforce strategy. And then relatedly, tighter coordination with human resources and business and fiscal services. So human resources to align with the LEA's workforce strategy and hiring needs, and then business and fiscal services to strategize around affordability and financial sustainability strategies for the program. So one residency program lead shared, over the last couple of years, the residency hasn't been a priority. LEA partners are curious about it, they're excited about it, but they're not getting the right people in their system in place to engage in more recruitment efforts, gather more mentors, allocate financial resources. Another lead shared that part of the problem is with human resources not really understanding the intent behind this yet, and that should be a goal. Another area that these early grantees have had room to strengthen their partnerships is in developing more robust staffing structures to build and manage partnerships. One lead shared one of the hardest components of successfully starting our residencies has been having a team that's super consistent and present, ideally having paid and protected time to work together throughout the year as part of our job descriptions and roles. Similarly, another lead shared, this is where we struggle the most, finding that balance between what people are tasked with in their normal everyday job and then the teacher residency program. And they share how they've been working through this. Recently, we've made changes in how we're using our grant funding, not substantial changes, but more around who's doing what and having more clearly defined roles. This is what will contribute to our sustainability if we can make sure we have a solid foundation. Some partnership bright spots. Leads in programs with strong LEA and IHE leadership engagement spoke to leadership understanding of the residency value add. They spoke to residency alignment with district strategy. They spoke to the residency gaining traction as a workforce solution. One lead shared there was a conversation to apply for the grant at the cabinet level. He speaks about that early involvement that was so important. Says our superintendent was involved, HR was involved, special ed was involved, fiscal services was involved. I know absolutely that my superintendent is aware of the grant. Another lead shared, the superintendent knows why this is so important and valuable to us. The board knows we can defend financial allocations easily, saying here's why we do it, why we train our own people to become our teachers. Let's get a pipeline from our own people. And this leads speaking to the coordination and partnership that they had built with human resources. Shared, we work with human resources yearly on retirement projections and 3-year data trends of what we've hired in. We're really looking at data to drive the decision-making of where we need to focus. So doing that work of aligning the residency program tightly with LEA hiring needs. So that is a kind of high-level takeaway of some of what we've been seeing about challenges through the early years of the evaluation. And in a minute, Gina and Yvonne are going to share what they've learned about partnership practices and affordability and sustainable models for residencies. But we wanted to just pause for a few minutes before we do that, take a temperature check. Feel free to jump in or put something in the chat. What's your familiarity with residencies? Do you have one in your LEA? Is your LEA thinking of starting one? Do the challenges and opportunities that have been surfacing in the evaluation resonate with what you've seen in your context? What questions do you have?
And we are seeing a couple of examples in the chat from people who have residency programs or partnerships. Also, if you have a question for Kate, you can unmute and just ask it directly or in the chat.
Gudia, can you say what you mean by traditional public school cost?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I was just curious. Our residency program has been a big success here in Linwood. And just as you described, Kate, it's so many different benefits. I was just curious, how does the cost compare in terms of someone going to Cal State to do the master's and teaching credential versus like a residency program? Because with the residency program, we get the benefits where they get, a stipend or something as well. I just wanted to know, what does that look like in terms of cost?
That is a good question, and I might hold that until Gina and Yvonne have a chance to share.
Got it.
And
Okay.
a lot of it has to do with the structures that a partnership is able to put in place, either for reducing costs through tuition supplements or through stipends, workforce opportunities during their residency year. So Gina
Yeah. And just to
Yvonne.
be clear, I'm not looking at the cost on for the school district, but what is the cost comparison for a student who's exploring different options?
Okay, well, on that note, I think let's jump into Gina and Yvonne to share what they've learned with respect to that. So Gina, take it away, and I can advance the slides for you. Just let me know when to switch.
Thank you, Kate. And I do see a lot of familiar faces and names on here. So I know many of you are familiar with residency. So I may be preaching to the choir here, but you might find some new information as well. We do have some models for creating affordable and sustainable residencies, but I want to start with the challenge mentioned by Kate around partnership and why the partnership needs to look different. So Kate, if you can go to the next slide, this representation is of a resident and what is required around supports. Kate mentioned there needs to be staffing. So both on the LEA and IHE leadership, what we have found is that successful residencies have a representative at each institution so that the resident doesn't face barriers from either and can navigate the system fairly easily. There is typically a site administrator that's a part of the resident experience at the site. There's a residency coordinator at the IHE level or the LEA, or both in Alder's case. But there's also a field supervisor and then the site mentor. That's a lot of resources, time, and money being put into one candidate. It's a high investment in residency, which is why we say that the partnership has to shift to what we're typically used to, which is a student teaching partnership. So if we go to the next slide, Kate, I'll talk a little bit about, the difference between a student teaching partnership versus a residency partnership. Many of us already have a student teaching partnership. We're saying we're going to take that partnership and we're going to create a deeper one for residency because it does require bringing two large institutions together to say, what is the vision of our program? How is this going to change and impact our community in a different way that we have in the past? How are we going to recruit together? How are we going to train together so that we are creating a cohesive program that is aligned both to the university experience, but also to the community they're going to teach in? Where the residency program can be different than the student teaching program is we're typically recruiting a cohort of candidates. And so there's courses that are being taken with 15, 20 candidates from the university that are entering into one district. In the past, the university couldn't use the curriculum or the classroom management from that specific district because they're training for the entire community. But what we're saying now is let's make it specific to the context they're entering in. So they're trained and day one ready. But in order to do that work, we have to do all the partnership work. This is the foundation of a strong residency. We have to have a shared vision and theory of action of how we're going to move the work. We have to have committed members. We have to recruit, train, and retain our candidates for the specific community context. And there needs to be people at all levels of our districts doing this work to make sure our candidates are prepared. And so that partnership piece is critical when you're starting the residency program, but that is also how you start to build affordable models. And I'm going to share a little bit on this next slide on what those models can look like so that you are not always dependent on stipends. Stipends are nice, but they're not always sustainable. And so a couple of models here two of them that have been implemented. And as Kate mentioned, this is a district for 8 years where I ran a residency program and did 2 of these models. The third one we are currently exploring. So paraeducator, we call them residency paraeducators, are paraeducators within your own systems. They are people who you want to grow into teaching roles. So they're typically either part-time or full-time paras. So they're receiving a salary and benefits, and they are also doing their student teaching, their clinical practice experience at the school site. This does have to be negotiated with CSEA typically in order for it to be implemented. But we know that there are a few districts out here in California who are currently have para residencies. The other is a substitute teacher. And so if we want to also grow within our own, giving our residents an opportunity to complete their student teaching, but maybe once or twice a week, opportunities to sub so that they're earning additional income while they're acquiring their credentials. And then the last one we're exploring is apprenticeship models for residency. Now, this is a learn and earn model. Currently working with CTA to see how we can make that happen in California, because it would increase the salary and benefits for any candidate who wants to enter the teaching field and teach in your community. And so we will show you some of the benefits when it comes to cost on the next slide and what you can look like. Now, many programs have posted these benefits in their flyers on their websites to attract candidates. So it is how they braid and connect financial supports. These are just examples. So for example, there is the CTC Residency Grant Fund that was mentioned earlier. Right now, that is up to $40,000 per candidate with a minimum of $20,000 going to the candidate. So I put an average of 30 here going to the candidate for a traditional residency model. There's also the Golden State Grant. That's up to $20,000, and then the federal Teach Grant, that's up to $4,000. So through a traditional program, a candidate can earn up to $54,000 as a financial package. Now, it's up to, so again, these are averages, it's just examples, it's dependent on your local context. Same thing for the paraeducator residency model. You'll notice the CTC residency grant goes across the 3, which is traditional, para, and substitute. The Golden State Grant goes across all 4, and so does the Teach Grant, because those are scholarship opportunities available to candidates. There are conditions for those, so you will need to see if that's something that you would qualify for. Now, typically with the scholarship residency programs have actually held the candidate's hand and walked them through applying to make sure those applications go through and they get those monies. So again, lots of supports for the candidates to get these funds. The benefits to the para model is there's also salary and benefits. So there's an example of salary and benefits, and you can see the financial package being up to $73,000. Again, very dependent on your local context. The same thing for substitute teaching. And here is what we believe would be an example for an apprenticeship model, should you decide to have a residency apprenticeship model. Right now, you would have to go through the para role because it would be the easiest way to transition into a para apprenticeship residency model. So you see that I added the salary there to be a little higher because it has to be higher for apprenticeship. And then the benefits would also increase to be a little bit less than a para because we're not talking about the CTC residency stipend being included into the apprenticeship model. So after looking at these, just kind of thinking through these different models, these are typically grow your own models. A lot of these exist within our system. Some of you are starting these models. Are there any questions you might have about some of this funding, what's available, or the different ones that are represented here?
Gina, I'm still struggling to wrap my head around the apprenticeship model. Can you give an example of what it might look like? In terms of you have a classified employee, and then what?
You have a classified employee. And so right now, the easiest way we're thinking about this is to be a para, right? They would have to have a salary increase because it does have to be comparable. They have to have benefits. it might have to be negotiated. And so this is what we're talking to CTA right now about. It might have to be its own standalone because there are contracts, right? So that contract could shift what this could look like, which is why we just put an average salary on there. It might not have to be a para. It might be we've negotiated a residency apprenticeship position that now has its own salary and benefits. That was a great question, by the way. All right, thank you, Kate. I'm going to go ahead and transition to Ivan then, who has great examples of how he breaks funding within the Alder system.
Great, thank you all. Good morning. Great to be here with every single one of you. I see one of our partners, Linwood, and we're very proud of the work we've done there and continue to do. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll provide sort of the framing and the way we think about financial barriers and how to mitigate them. So we can go to the next slide. One of the things that we've done and invested a lot is right from the get-go from enrollment, we needed to develop a system in which we could identify what are the needs of our students as they're coming in, right, our residents. Then part of that is develop the knowledge and understanding of resources and support to be able to address the needs. And we do that through an intake survey. So as our students are enrolling with Alder GSE, they've been accepted by our partners. They complete this intake survey, and I'll share some of the data points that we've gathered. And then one of the important aspects as we develop the resources to support the needs, it's to be grounded in whole adult work and also culturally sustaining approach, because that is really foundational to the demographics of the students that we serve. And then really through my office in terms of student services, really look at wraparound support. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just preface with sharing a brief overview of who Alder students are. I started with Alder 6 years ago when we were just with 65 students. We're now at our highest 443. Next year, we're going to go 500. So I will just say that the model that we've done has been with the smaller number, and now we've approached it with the much higher number supporting our cohorts throughout California. One of the two important things in terms of demographics is that we have 82% of students who identify as people of color. And also in terms of first generation college students, that's 70%. So we understand that from the beginning, how our students identify and the kind of needs are diverse, and we need to be able to be responsive to that. So the next slide, one of the things that we've also been clear about is within a survey that we do at the beginning, is also identifying the kind of financial responsibilities and what we call really financial burdens that students come into the program. Because if we know that if students are already coming in with significant either debt, right, that they might not be so open about taking out a loan or so forth, right? And we've been we've been mitigating that aspect of not relying on loans for tuition, for especially given all the things that Gina shared about in terms of some of the tuition supports at the state, and we're very grateful that the state has invested heavily on that. So we mitigated that. So that's just a quick overview of some of the data we received the past year. And then the next slide, we've also been very good at tracking and ensuring that we increase the so we reduce. So the first sort of table on the left side shows you just for the past few years, how heavily, right? And this is, I mean, the first GSTG, the Golden State Teacher Grants disbursements happened in 21-22. And that's when you start seeing, I mean, a huge sort of increase. But even before that, so you see that a lot of students relied on loans to pay for tuition because that was one of the biggest avenues in terms of funding. But since the avenue of the GSTJ, that has been reducing. So our data really demonstrate that by leveraging the federal Teach Grant and other aspects, one of the other things that, you know, we're starting to track now is also Cal Grant, because as some of you know, if a student within a year to 15 months graduated from undergrad who was a Cal Grant recipient, they can continue to access Cal Grant through their credentialing program. So that's another avenue. We're seeing much less because of just the constraints and in terms of that grant, but that's another one that we're also tracking. But we see here that for this current class, we have close to 94% of our students who are accessing the GSTG. And we're very clear about ensuring that we support students with that. And that has essentially really minimized the reliance on loans. And you see that for this current class, out of the highest class at Alder, only 19% are relying on loans. So just wanted to be very sort of transparent in terms of investing time and effort to ensure that students get access to already existing financial aid is really, really vital for student sustainability and being willing to enroll in the program. The next slide demonstrates, as I mentioned, some of the things that we do is track within the intake survey and others, track access to other that are non-financial aid, but are definitely financial mitigation needs in terms of one of the biggest questions is health access, living in terms of housing and so forth. And so by this intake survey, we already have a keen understanding that who's living at home or who's going to be relocating and will need housing support, who is already accessing Medi-Cal or other low-cost health care, who's going to need support with that, and we're very proactive. Typically, we've seen that about 30% of each class is typically in need of support with Medi-Cal. We also do a lot of work around accessing students who will need CalFresh access or CalWorks if they're a family, and also other aspects in terms of carpooling and other things. So we've been very meticulous about ensuring that through the initial steps in enrollment, we are being proactive not only in terms of the financial aid support, but also those non-financial aid aspects that are, what we sometimes call in higher ed basic needs. And we'll proceed with the next slide. And that translates in terms of cases, and we've been very meticulous about ensuring that we track. And so we break it down when it comes to financial aid. So you see some of the cases there that my team supports in terms of some of the aspects. So when it comes to wellness, you see some of the cases there. And then this is just a brief overview. And then the next slide really just breaks it down to kind of think about where these supports are. So some of the core areas already mentioned. Childcare is also a strong area that we've been very attuned to, given that we have a wide array of our different students. So we have a lot of caretakers, close to 30% of our students. And so being able to address that they're going to require some additional supports. Also our DACA recipients, especially because although they do qualify for the GSTG, they don't qualify for federal financial aid. And so we've seen that we need to be responsive to the needs that some of our other students who might lack access to certain aspects to be able to be very responsive. We've also developed local resources within Alder. So we have a bridge loan to be able to mitigate when some of the financial aid. So with GSTG, it's not like they receive the grant right as they're starting with us. It usually takes a few weeks. And so to be able to help with mitigate those weeks of somebody enrolling in the summer, we start our program in the summer, but they might not get it until, for example, in August, that aid. So we do a bridge loan to bridge that. We also have a compelling needs, which really offers emergency need. We've also been really grateful that Alder's invested a lot in our scholarship that we provide to our students, both for students who identify as Black educators. We have a grant for that, as well as some of our DACA recipients that typically received an Alder scholarship to help with some of offsetting additional tuition or some of the living costs. And then other students between like $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 scholarships. And then we assist during the enrollment process with, if anybody needs roommate support, given especially in our area, we're seeing a high need of students needing to either support with housing. So we've been very clear about that. And then really understanding and developed a lot of expertise with state and federal supports. One of the things I know we talked about, so on unemployment benefits, some of our students have been able to leverage that, and especially there's a specific, on the next slide, I'll break down sort of the way we develop the expertise and been very clear about ensuring that students get access to Medi-Cal, Covered California, and CalFresh. So at the onset, we, if the students meet the income level, we've been able to develop a letter of verification. We support with them applying. Sometimes it's even, helping them through the verification process, because it does take a lot, especially if some students have not been able to access. What we are finding is that a lot of our students during undergraduate were already accessing these supports. So it's a matter of continuing those supports throughout the residency program. A note on unemployment benefits, one of the things we've learned is that, especially if you're a SPED paraprofessional who's leaving their position to get an ed specialist credential, EDD already has specific language to get them access to unemployment benefits. That's already existing. So how do we then leverage that as a continuum natural to leverage unemployment benefits? And then we really need to advocate to EDD to potentially open that window of not just SPED paraprofessionals, but maybe for others. So that'll be an interesting, in terms of policy work for those who are in that field to be able to do that. But we've been able to leverage a lot of SPED paraprofessionals who are accessing unemployment benefits throughout, and then others who might qualify naturally if they were, within their benefits and so forth. And then I believe there's just one last slide that I'll just share, that just similar with MTSS supports in TK-12, we've taken that in terms of really seeing how we are responsive. I talked about the wraparound supports, and one of the benefits that I think we've been really clear about is that we do need somebody within the partner that is helping support our students on the ground within the district. And that's what we call the partner director. So we work really hand in hand. And in my team, we assign a team member to really support with tier 1. So really ensuring that they're developing a financial plan, testing plan. We know that testing has also been a barrier for our students. And so mitigating that, and then be very responsive. And so we have also specialized team members who are, keen on certain aspects. And then when we talk about student success team, that's a group of us that really, for those more higher need areas, to really mitigate and ensure retention and sustainability in the program, to see them not only graduate but hired at the end of the year. We're a 1-year program. So that, I know that was a lot of that was pretty fast. So happy to also answer any questions. And then I will add to, I guess somebody asked about the apprenticeship model. One of the things, to Gina's point, I'll say, we've done some research on the impact of actually having a resident in the classroom. And so one of the things that we also need to see is that there's a strong benefit. Our students spend 4 days in the classroom. Those 4 days, you essentially, students are leveraging 2 adults, 2 professionals. One is the master teacher and the other one is the apprentice. But there's a lot of impact, and we've been able to do some research around the impact of actually having residents with the academic success of students in the classroom within that particular. So that's another avenue that, as you're developing these potential apprenticeship models, you can argue that they're actually working in your system and they are getting a living stipend, but within this model, it could actually be seen as in terms of employment and benefits, because there is an impact to student success, not only to the apprenticeship and the learning of the resident and the support that the mentor provides, but also to the success of students. So that was just an additional note.
Hi there, this is Melissa White. I thought maybe we could just go back to Gudial's question about the difference between the cost of doing a traditional program that involves student teaching and the cost of residency. I don't know if Gina or Ivan, you'd like to take that.
Yeah, I think, for Alder specific, this is all that we do, residency. So I think we've been very clear about keeping tuition within the GSTG thresholds. Our tuition is about $21K for the master's and teacher credential. I know some CSUs or other programs might do some comp tuition given the specialization of the program. So they might already have natural reductions within tuition, but you're really looking at if it's through a CSU, you're looking at traditional what the typical credit union costs are for CSUs, unless that specific CSU has taken on and said, you know what, we're going to leverage some local funding to reduce tuition because of this partnership.
Mhm. I think one thing to just flag is that, like, the most basic, and I'm not a financial person, so here's my lay understanding of the situation. In a residency, in a student teaching, the placement is not full-time or a full academic year part-time. Student teaching is more bounded. As a result, there's a higher need for residents to have a full compensation that covers the full cost of living, because the employment opportunities are limited in a residency because of the time that's involved in being in a residency. And so the cost ends up being higher for residents than a typical student teaching arrangement, because you need to cover those living expenses.
I was also thinking about the time. So the time to complete a program, in a traditional model, 3 to 4 semesters, if you're going full-time, and with residency that can sort of get negotiated between a 2 to 3 semester. So sometimes those costs will also, they're reduced along with what Ivan was saying, scholarships, things that are worked out with the university through residency programs.
We had planned on a kind of quick Q&A before you all have a chance to go into breakouts, but any other questions for Gina and Ivan, or any experiences that you've had perhaps trying to build intense and rigorous preparation pathways that are also affordable for candidates, or challenges that you've seen?
We're going to go into our small groups. There will be a facilitator there to guide you through a couple of questions, just to talk about what resonated for you and what you heard. What questions might you have for someone who's a little further along in this work? How might you apply this information to your context? And if there are any other steps that you're now considering. We do have a Padlet that your facilitator will share that you can either write on, or your facilitator can write on 1 to 2 to 3 key takeaways, and then we'll come back into the whole group and share when we're done.